London's East End in the 1880s was a breeding ground for the most violent criminal gangs Britain had ever seen, where razor-wielding thugs ruled through terror and the police dared not venture alone. To expose this underworld of organized crime, a fearless journalist disguised himself as a dock worker and walked straight into gang territory. Your name is William Crawford, and this is what life was really like among the dangerous gangs of Victorian London. Before we start, likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them thinking, wait, people in Auckland listen to history stories to sleep. Okay. Tonight it's 1880s London. But hold on. Get cozy first. Like actually cozy. Pillow's good. Blanket situation handled. Perfect. Trust me on this one. Your eyes open to the dim light of a Whitechapel lodging house, not the comfortable darkness of your bedroom right now, but the gray pre-dawn of a room shared with a dozen other men. The smell hits you immediately. Unwashed bodies, stale beer, and something sharper, the metallic tang of blood on clothes not properly washed. The year is 1882, and you've just spent your first night disguised as a dock worker in the most dangerous square mile in London. You sit up carefully on the thin mattress, little more than sacking stuffed with straw, thrown onto bare boards. Unlike your comfortable bed at home where you can stretch and adjust your blanket just so, here every movement brings complaints from neighbors packed too close, sleeping off gin, or simply too exhausted to care about comfort. Around you, men stir in various states of consciousness. One coughs violently, a wet rattling sound that speaks of consumption slowly eating his lungs. Another mutters in his sleep, words you can't make out, but tone suggesting nightmares. A third sits up, spits into a tin can he keeps by his sleeping spot, and begins pulling on boots that have more holes than leather. The lodging housekeeper, a massive woman with forearms like hams, pounds on the doorframe. "Out!" she shouts. "Sixpence doesn't buy you all day." You're up and gone by 6, or you pay again. The men rise with practiced efficiency, gathering meager belongings, adjusting clothes slept in for days or weeks. You watch this morning ritual, this dance of the desperate, and realize how precarious existence is for these men. One missed day of work, one illness, one stroke of bad luck, and they're on the street completely. Not even a sixpenny bed to call temporary home. You pull on your disguise. Rough wool trousers stiff with dirt and sweat. A shirt that once might have been white. Heavy boots with holes in the soles. A flat cap pulled low. The transformation from gentleman journalist to East End laborer is complete. Your Oxford education, your comfortable life, your proper upbringing, none of it helps you now in this urban jungle where only the cunning and the violent survive. The washroom, if it can be called that, is a trough of cold water that's already gray with the grime of earlier risers. You splash your face, the shock of cold helping wake you fully. The mirror is cracked and spotted, but you can see enough to verify your disguise holds. The stubble helps, as does the dirt you've allowed to accumulate under your fingernails. You look like you belong here now, which is both your protection and your danger. Outside, Whitechapel Road is already awake despite the early hour. Factory whistles scream across the Thames, their sound cutting through the morning fog like knives. Costermongers shout their wares, voices hoarse from years of such shouting, but still carrying over the general din. Women empty chamber pots from upper windows into gutters already flowing with refuse, occasionally shouting warnings to those below, more often not bothering. The morning air isn't the fresh relief you'd expect. It's thick with coal smoke from thousands of chimneys, the chemical stench of nearby tanning works, the rot from overflowing courts where hundreds live packed like livestock in pens. Your eyes water, your throat constricts, and you understand why so many EastEnders die young from respiratory ailments. Simply breathing here is slowly killing you. A man sidles up beside you as you pause at the corner, trying to get your bearings. Name's Billy, he mutters without looking at you directly. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact with anyone wearing a silk neckerchief. And for God's sake, don't ask questions where anyone can hear. You recognize him from your careful research. Billy Walsh, former member of the Blind Beggar Gang, now making his living on the edges, doing odd jobs and occasionally guiding outsiders through territory that would otherwise get them killed. You've paid him well for this tour, money delivered through an intermediary 2 days ago, but you can see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scan the street, the manner in which he positions himself to always have an escape route visible. Billy's in his 30s, you estimate, though the East End ages people quickly so he might be younger. He's thin but wiry, with the efficient movement of someone who's survived multiple gang wars through speed and awareness rather than strength. A scar runs from his left ear down to his jaw, pale against weather-darkened skin. His hands, when he gestures, show the telltale scars across the knuckles of someone who's fought with bare fists more times than can be counted. I spent months researching gang structures in Victorian London. A historian at the British Library told me something that still gives me chills. These weren't just street criminals, she explained. They were organized, territorial, and more feared than the Metropolitan Police. In some streets, gang law was the only law that mattered. She showed me police reports where officers admitted they wouldn't enter certain areas without reinforcements of at least 6 men. And even then, only in daylight. Follow me, Billy says, starting to walk. And whatever you see today, you didn't see. Whatever you hear, you didn't hear. That's rule 1 for staying alive in the East End. Rule 2 is don't trust anyone who seems too friendly. Rule 3 is always know where the exits are. Follow those rules, and you might actually survive to write your story. You move deeper into Whitechapel, away from the main thoroughfare, and into the warren of narrow courts and alleys that make up the real East End. The buildings here lean together like drunks, supporting each other. 5 and 6 stories of crumbling brick with washing hung between them like tattered flags. The architecture is Victorian prosperity's ugly underbelly. Buildings thrown up quickly and cheaply to house the flood of workers needed for London's industries, maintained poorly or not at all by landlords who view them purely as income extraction. Children play in gutters flowing with sewage, their faces pale and pinched with hunger, their clothes little more than rags held together with hope and dirt. They're playing a game that involves throwing stones at a chalk mark on a wall, shouting and laughing with the resilience of youth that finds joy even in hell. Some are barefoot despite the cold and the filth. Most have the distended bellies that speak of malnutrition rather than adequate food. Women sit in doorways, some sewing piecework that pays pennies for hours of labor, some just staring with the blank eyes of the truly hopeless. A few call out to passing men, offering services for coins that might buy bread or gin. The line between survival and prostitution is thin here, often crossed out of necessity rather than choice. See that corner? Billy nods toward an intersection where 3 young men lounge against a wall. They're not actually lounging, they're watching. That's Bessarabian territory. Jewish gang, toughest bastards you'll ever meet. Came over from Russia and Poland with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a determination to never be victims again. They built an empire on protection and gambling, and they defend it with a ferocity that makes other gangs think twice before crossing them. The young men wear silk neckerchiefs, Billy points out, his voice dropping lower. That's how you know. Bright colors, expensive silk, worn where everyone can see. Each gang has its signals. Neckerchief color, which pocket they keep their watch chain in, how they wear their caps, even which side of the street they favor walking on. You learn fast, or you wander into the wrong territory and end up in the Thames with your throat cut. The three men range in age from perhaps 18 to mid-20s. All are lean, hard, with the watchful eyes of predators. One picks his teeth with a knife, cleaning it casually while his gaze sweeps the street. Another smokes a cigarette, the movements of bringing it to his lips and exhaling. Deliberate, practiced, designed to look relaxed while remaining coiled for violence. The third simply watches you and Billy approach, his hand resting on something in his coat pocket. As you pass the corner, one of the young men straightens, eyes narrowing as he assesses you. Billy raises a hand in a specific gesture, 2 fingers extended, thumb tucked. The young man's posture shifts slightly, aggression easing but not disappearing entirely. He nods once, barely perceptible, and Billy continues walking without breaking stride. What was that? You ask once you've turned the next corner and the Bessarabian watchers are out of sight. Signal, Billy explains, his voice still quiet. Told them you're with me, under my protection, such as it is. Without that, they'd have stopped us, checked our business, searched our pockets, maybe just words and intimidation if we seemed harmless. Maybe cautious to the head if they thought we were rival gang members or undercover police. Depends on their mood. Depends on how recently they've been in a fight. Depends on whether they've had breakfast or are running on gin and hunger. A kosh, you've learned in your research, is a length of hardwood or metal wrapped in leather, designed to crack skulls without leaving much external bleeding. Quick, efficient, and terrifyingly common in the East End. Some are simple, just a stick with leather. Others are sophisticated, lead weights sewn into leather pouches, balanced for maximum impact. The best kosh makers in the East End can produce weapons that will drop a man unconscious with a single blow while leaving minimal visible damage. Perfect for street attacks where you don't want witnesses to see obvious wounds. The streets narrow further as Billy leads you deeper into the maze. The buildings here are in worse condition. Windows stuffed with rags instead of glass. Doors hanging crooked on broken hinges. Entire walls showing daylight through gaps in the brickwork. The smell intensifies too, concentrated by the narrow passages. An assault of sewage, rot, disease, and despair. This is Dorset Street, Billy says quietly, as if speaking too loudly might wake something best left sleeping. Worst street in London, they call it. More murders per yard than anywhere else in the empire. Police won't patrol it alone. Even gang members are careful here. This is where the truly desperate end up, where the last shreds of hope come to die. When I checked police records from 1882, I found something remarkable and horrifying. Dorset Street, just 100 yards long, averaged 1 violent death per week. That's 52 murders a year in a single street. The Metropolitan Police rarely patrolled it. Too dangerous, their report said. Officers only entered in groups of 4 or more, and even then, they were frequent targets for bottles, bricks, and worse. Several police reports noted that witnesses to crimes on Dorset Street were impossible to find. Not because they didn't exist, but because speaking to police was a death sentence more certain than whatever crime they'd witnessed. The smell here is worse than anywhere you've experienced. Open sewers running down the center of the street, rotting garbage piled in corners, human waste where people have given up walking to communal privies. And underneath it all, that metallic blood smell stronger now, mixed with something sweeter and more nauseating that you realize is decomposition. Bodies move in the shadows, faces you can't quite see, watching your passage with the predatory focus of people who survive by reading threats and opportunities in every stranger. You feel eyes on your back, assessing, calculating. Billy's hand stays near his pocket where you know he carries a knife. His entire body is tense, ready to run or fight at the first sign of trouble. A sudden commotion ahead makes Billy grab your arm, pulling you into a doorway so forcefully you nearly stumble. "Stay still," he hisses. "Don't move, don't speak, don't even breathe loud." A group of men explodes from a pub, fists already flying, boots stomping. You see the glint of metal, hear the wet crack of wood on bone, the meaty thud of fists on flesh. Two men go down immediately, one screaming, clutching his face where blood pours between his fingers, the other ominously silent, not moving even as boots kick his ribs and head. The others continue fighting over the fallen bodies with a ferocity that seems almost animal. This isn't boxing, isn't even a proper brawl. It's desperate, vicious, with no rules except survive and hurt the other man more than he hurts you. Someone produces a bottle, smashes it against a wall, and swings the jagged remains at an opponent's face. The man dodges barely and responds with a kick to the groin that drops his attacker. "Don't interfere," Billy hisses, his grip on your arm tightening. "You're here to watch, remember? You get involved in a gang fight. Doesn't matter whose side you pick. Doesn't matter if you're trying to help. You're dead. They'll turn on you together just for being an outsider who stuck his nose in. The fight ends as quickly as it started, maybe 2 minutes from first blow to last man standing. The victors drag their fallen comrade back into the pub, leaving the other man motionless in the gutter, blood pooling around his head, mixing with the sewage to create patterns of dark red swirling through brown and gray. People step around him without a second glance. A woman with a basket of washing simply adjusts her path, giving the body a slightly wider berth, but otherwise showing no reaction. A man actually steps over the fallen body, not even breaking stride. Two children playing nearby glance at it, decide it's not interesting, and return to their game. Within minutes, the street looks almost normal again, except for the dark stains spreading in the gutter and the occasional person giving that spot a slightly wider berth. "Jesus," you whisper, your voice shaking despite yourself. "Shouldn't someone do something?" Billy looks at you like you've suggested flying to the moon. Like what? Call the police? They won't come, not to Dorset Street, not for an East End body. Could be an hour before they bother, if they bother at all. More likely someone will tip them off tonight, and they'll collect the corpse in the morning, if dogs haven't dragged it off by then. No investigation, no questions, just another dead man in a place where men die daily. But his family might not know for days, Billy interrupts. Might not care. Half the men on Dorset Street have families that disowned them, wives that left them, children that don't know their names. This is where you end up when everything else is gone. Rock bottom, below, rock bottom. This casual acceptance of death makes your skin crawl. Back in your comfortable world, a body in the street would cause hysteria, crowds gathering, police responding immediately, newspapers printing breathless accounts. Here, it's just Tuesday morning. Another casualty in a war that never ends, fought over territory and pride, and the desperate need to prove you're stronger than the forces trying to destroy you. "Come on," Billy says, releasing your arm once he's certain the danger is past. "I'll show you where the real business happens, where the gangs that run this hell actually operate." He leads you away from Dorset Street, and you're grateful to leave its particular horror behind, though you know the image of that motionless body will stay with you forever. You've seen death before, attended funerals, viewed bodies prepared for burial, but this is different. This is death treated as inconvenience rather than tragedy, human life valued so little that its ending merits less attention than a spilled bucket of water. Billy navigates through a series of turns that you couldn't retrace if your life depended on it, which it very well might. Finally, you emerge onto a slightly wider street where a pub stands with a weathered sign reading "The Blind Beggar." Despite the early hour, it's already busy. Men crowding the bar, drinking gin that's probably more water and methylated spirits than actual alcohol, but it gets them drunk fast and cheap, which is all that matters. The air inside is thick with tobacco smoke, the sour smell of spilled beer, and the particular odor of too many unwashed bodies in too small a space. Your eyes water from the smoke, and you resist the urge to cough, not wanting to draw attention. Billy nods to the barman, a bald man with massive forearms and knuckles swollen from frequent use. The scars across those knuckles tell a story of violence regularly dispensed, order maintained through the simple threat of overwhelming force. The barman studies you for a long moment, eyes narrowed, clearly trying to place whether he knows you, whether you're a threat, whether you're police attempting an undercover operation. Billy must pass some signal you don't see, because the barman's posture eases slightly, and he jerks his head toward a partition at the back. Through the partition, you see what makes this more than just another East End gin palace, desperate to separate working men from their pennies. Tables where men play cards with serious money visible, more than most dock workers see in a month of brutal labor. Women in surprisingly fine dresses for this neighborhood serve drinks and collect bets, moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Their dresses, while far nicer than anything the street women wear, still show the wear of hard use, the stains that won't come out, the repairs made with thread that doesn't quite match. And in the corner, enthroned like a king in his counting house, sits a man Billy whispers is called One-Eyed Charlie. The nickname is descriptive. Where his left eye should be is just scarred tissue, puckered and discolored. But his remaining eye is sharp as a hawk's, missing nothing, cataloging every person in the room, every transaction, every potential threat or opportunity. Charlie runs the Blind Beggar Gang, Billy explains quietly, his voice barely audible over the general noise. Not the biggest gang in the East End, not the most violent, though they're plenty violent when needed, but smart, very smart. Charlie's probably the sharpest gang leader in Whitechapel. He controls protection rackets from here to Limehouse, takes his cut from every gambling den, every brothel, every illegal business in a 6-block radius. The man's probably worth £1,000 or more, which is more than a factory owner might make. You take a seat at a table near the wall where you can observe without drawing too much attention. The chair is rickety, the table scarred with knife marks and stained with decades of spilled drinks. Billy orders 2 gins from a passing woman, and you pretend to sip while watching the operation unfold with the fascination of an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. The gambling is serious business. Men study their cards with intensity, bet with careful calculation. These aren't gentlemen gambling for entertainment. This is their livelihood, or their attempt at one, the hope that cards might provide what labor cannot. Some win, showing no emotion beyond a slight relaxation of tension. Most lose, their faces growing longer, their drinks arriving more frequently, the downward spiral into debt and desperation visible in real time. A shopkeeper enters through the front door, his face pale, clutching a small cloth bag with both hands as if it might escape. Billy nudges you to watch, and you observe the man's approach to Charlie's table with the posture of someone going to their execution. He places the bag on the table without a word, without meeting Charlie's eye, like a medieval peasant delivering tribute to his lord. Charlie doesn't even look inside the bag. He simply nods to one of his men, a thick-shouldered enforcer with a face like weathered granite. The man opens the bag, counts quickly with fingers that move with surprising dexterity for their size, then leans close to whisper something. Charlie's one eye fixes on the shopkeeper with an intensity that makes even you, watching from across the room, feel uncomfortable. "You're short," Charlie says. Not loud, but his voice carries, cutting through the ambient noise. The pub goes quiet, conversations dying mid-sentence, cards held motionless in hands frozen by the sudden tension. Business has been slow, Mr. Reese, the shopkeeper stammers, his voice shaking. My wife's been ill. Medical bills, you understand? I'll have the rest next week, I swear it. On my children's lives, I swear it. Charlie stands slowly, and you understand why men fear him despite his relatively small stature. There's something in the way he moves, the absolute confidence of a predator that's never lost a fight that mattered, that speaks of violence so casual it's become second nature. He walks around the table, approaching the shopkeeper with the measured pace of someone who has all the time in the world and knows his victim has nowhere to run. I'm in business too, Charlie says conversationally, his tone almost friendly, which somehow makes it more threatening. My business is protection. You pay me, nothing bad happens to your shop. Very simple arrangement. You don't pay me, well, that's when accidents occur. Fires start, windows break, stock goes missing, sometimes people get hurt. You understand how accidents work? Yes, Mr. Reese, the shopkeeper whispers, his voice barely audible. I understand. Charlie pulls a kosh from his belt, the movement so smooth it suggests frequent practice. Before you can process what's happening, before the shopkeeper can even flinch, Charlie drives it into the man's ribs with practiced precision. The sound is distinctive, a wet thud that speaks of serious damage, despite leaving no external wound visible through clothing. The shopkeeper doubles over, gasping for air that won't come, his face going red, then gray. Charlie grabs his collar, holding him upright with surprising strength, keeping him on his feet when his legs clearly want to give out. That's a reminder, Charlie says pleasantly, as if discussing the weather rather than administering a beating. Next week, full amount plus what you owe from today, plus an extra shilling for making me get out of my chair. Or next time, it's not your ribs. Maybe I visit your shop personally. Maybe I visit your home. Maybe your wife's illness becomes more than just expensive. You understand? The shopkeeper nods frantically, still unable to speak, tears streaming down his face from pain and humiliation and fear. Charlie releases him, and the man staggers toward the door, clutching his side, moving with the careful rigidity of someone trying not to aggravate cracked or broken ribs. The noise in the pub gradually returns, conversations resuming, cards being played again, as if nothing happened. Business as usual in the blind beggar. You've just witnessed the machinery of protection rackets in action, the combination of actual service provided, the threat of violence, and the periodic reinforcement of that threat to keep everyone in line. Billy catches your expression, reads the mixture of shock and fascination. You wanted to see how it works, he says. That's how it works. Charlie does actually protect that shopkeeper from other gangs, from thieves, from aggressive beggars who might drive away customers. The man pays his weekly fee, and his shop operates in relative peace. Price of doing business in the East End. Miss a payment, though, and you get reminded. Miss 2 payments, you get made an example of. Miss 3 payments. Well, nobody misses 3 payments because they're not around anymore to miss them. How much does he charge? You ask quietly, trying to process what you've witnessed, trying to fit it into some framework that makes sense. Depends on the business, Billy replies. Small shop like that, maybe 5 shillings a week. Larger operation, £1 or more. Gambling dens and brothels pay the most, sometimes £10 weekly or more. Charlie's probably pulling in 50, 60 pounds a week from protection alone across his territory. That's more than a factory manager makes in a year, more than most professional men. And that's just from protection. Add in his gambling operation, his percentage of prostitution, his smuggling connections, and Charlie's probably one of the richest men in the East End. The economics are staggering. You're watching a criminal enterprise that operates with the efficiency of any legitimate business, perhaps more so because it's enforced not by contracts and courts and legal remedies, but by immediate, certain violence. There's a terrible honesty to it. Pay and you're protected. Don't pay and you're hurt. No lawyers, no delays, no appeals, just action and consequence in their most primitive form. Two more men enter the pub, both wearing the distinctive silk neckerchiefs of the Bessarabian gang. The crowd shifts nervously, hands moving toward pockets where weapons are kept. This is a potential crisis. Rival gang members entering another gang's headquarters. And for a moment, the air crackles with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. But Charlie stands with a smile rather than a scowl. The Bessarabians smile back, equally warm. They approach his table, clasp hands with familiarity, speak quietly, while the pub watches with fascination. One of the Bessarabians produces a leather pouch that clinks with coins. Charlie counts it openly, nods satisfaction, and the transaction is complete. The Bessarabians leave as quickly as they arrived, tension evaporating like morning fog under sunlight. What was that? You ask, confused by the friendly interaction between supposed rivals. Border tax, Billy explains, sipping his gin. The Bessarabians run Flower and Dean Street, which is technically their territory, but some of their operations bleed into Charlie's area. Couple of brothels and a gambling den that service both territories. So they pay him a cut to avoid conflict. Call it a franchise fee, or a peace tax, or just good business sense. Cheaper to pay Charlie £10 a month than fight a war that might cost them 10 times that in dead men, destroyed property, and lost income while they're fighting instead of earning. These gangs, you're realizing, with growing understanding, aren't just violent criminals operating on instinct and rage. They're businessmen who happen to use violence as enforcement. They negotiate, compromise, form alliances, merge operations, even create elaborate systems of taxation and tribute, all to maximize profit and minimize risk, just like any business endeavor. The methods are brutal, but the underlying logic is coldly rational. Another man approaches Charlie's table, but this one is clearly different. Well-dressed in proper gentleman's clothing, clean-shaven, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who belongs to respectable society. He glances around the pub with barely disguised distaste before sitting briefly with Charlie, sliding an envelope across the table with the discretion of someone engaging in a transaction he'd prefer remained invisible. Charlie opens the envelope, counts the contents quickly, nods once. The well-dressed man stands without another word and hurries out, clearly anxious to be away from the East End and back to his proper world. The entire interaction takes perhaps 90 seconds. "Who was that?" you whisper to Billy. Billy shakes his head slightly. "Don't know his name and wouldn't tell you if I did. But I know the type. Businessman from the city, probably. Or maybe a minor aristocrat who likes to gamble where his peers won't see him. Possibly someone who visits the East End brothels for tastes that proper establishments won't cater to. Whatever his vice, he pays Charlie for discretion, for protection, for the assurance that what happens in the East End stays in the East End. The web of corruption extends far beyond the neighborhood boundaries, you realize. It's not just East End criminals preying on East End poor. It's respectable gentlemen funding gang operations while publicly condemning them. It's politicians taking gang money while campaigning on platforms of law and order. It's police officers on gang payrolls while arresting petty criminals to maintain the appearance of enforcement. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, with profits flowing upward and consequences flowing downward. As noon approaches, the pub grows even busier. More men crowd in, escaping briefly from whatever brutal labor they've been engaged in, seeking temporary oblivion in gin that destroys as much as it comforts. The gambling grows more intense, voices rising in argument over disputed hands. The women move faster, serving drinks, collecting money, occasionally sitting in laps or disappearing into back rooms for transactions that aren't officially acknowledged. Billy suggests moving on. There's more you need to see, he says. Different gangs, different territories, different methods. The blind beggar is just one piece of a very large, very violent puzzle. You follow him out into daylight that seems harsh after the dim interior of the pub. The street is busier now, midday commerce in full swing. Workers heading to and from shifts at the docks and factories. Women shopping at market stalls that sell everything from nearly rotting vegetables to suspiciously new-looking silk that probably fell off a wagon, if you understand the euphemism. Children darting through the crowds on errands for gang members, carrying messages, acting as lookouts, beginning their education in crime. Billy leads you east toward Bethnal Green. Navigation through streets that all look the same to you, but clearly hold distinct meaning for him. The buildings don't improve. Might even get worse if that's possible. But the faces change. More Irish here, Billy explains. The Nickel Gang runs this area. Different from the Bessarabians or Charlie's crew. More violent, less organized, but just as dangerous. Maybe more so because they're unpredictable. The Bessarabians you can negotiate with. Charlie you can reason with. The Nickel Gang, sometimes they just decide to break heads for the hell of it. You pass a group of boys, none older than 12, huddled in an alley playing what looks at first like an innocent game. But as you get closer, you see they're practicing pickpocketing. An old coat hangs on a nail, and the boys take turns trying to remove items from its pockets without ringing the bells sewn inside. The smallest boy, perhaps 8 years old, works the fabric with surprising dexterity, his thin fingers moving almost invisibly. That's how it starts, Billy says, his voice carrying unexpected sadness. Boys begin as lookouts, standing on corners and watching for police, whistling warnings when coppers approach. Then they graduate to runners, carrying messages between gang members, learning the territories and the players. Then pickpockets, shoplifters, petty theft. By 15, they're graduated to protection collections, enforcing territory, real violence. By 20, if they live that long, they're full gang members with their own crews to run. It's the only employment path available to most of them, the only apprenticeship they'll ever get. When I interviewed a social reformer who worked in the East End during this period, she told me something that haunts me still. Most of these boys weren't born criminals, she said. They were born into a world where crime was the only rational economic choice. No schools would take them because their parents couldn't afford the fees. Even the charity schools had more applicants than spaces. No legitimate businesses would hire them because they had no references, no training, no respectable connections. The gangs offered structure, income, identity, belonging. They offered survival in a world determined to grind these children into dust. A woman calls to Billy from a doorway, her voice urgent. He stops immediately, all his attention focusing on her. She's crying, pointing toward a building across the street, words tumbling out too fast for you to follow completely, but you catch enough. Her daughter, factory work, a man, trouble. Billy's expression hardens, his entire demeanor shifting from casual guide to something more dangerous. Wait here, he says to you, his voice carrying an authority you haven't heard before. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. Just wait. He crosses to the building, disappears inside. You wait as directed, standing awkwardly on the corner, aware of eyes watching you from various windows and doorways. People are assessing you, trying to determine if you're a threat, an opportunity, or just another nobody passing through. Your disguise protects you, the rough clothes and dirt making you look like you belong, but you're acutely aware of how quickly that protection could evaporate if someone looks too closely. Billy emerges 10 minutes later with a young girl, perhaps 14 or 15, her face bruised, dress torn, walking with the careful gait of someone in pain. He speaks to her quietly, words you can't hear, then leads her back to the waiting mother. The women embrace, the mother thanking Billy repeatedly while crying. What happened? You ask once Billy returns to your side. Girl works at a match factory, Billy explains, his voice tight with controlled anger. 12-hour days, sixpence a day, breathing phosphorus fumes that'll kill her before she's 30, if she's lucky enough to last that long. Foreman was taking liberties with her, if you understand my meaning. Forcing attentions she didn't want, threatening to fire her if she refused, threatening to blacklist her so she couldn't get factory work anywhere. And you prompt. And the Nickel Gang is supposed to protect workers in their territory, Billy continues. Part of their arrangement with the factory owners. Owners pay protection money. Gangs ensure labor peace. Make sure foremen don't cause problems that might lead to strikes or police attention. I let them know they need to have a word with this particular foreman. Remind him of the rules. He'll get a beating tonight, probably lose a few teeth, maybe a finger if the gang's feeling particularly emphatic. Girl will go back to work tomorrow, and foreman will remember to keep his hands to himself. Gang justice again, swift and brutal, and operating entirely outside official channels. Not police intervention, not courts, not any legitimate authority, just immediate action based on gang codes and economic interests. It's disturbing in its efficiency, troubling in its necessity, revealing in how completely official systems have failed these people. You walk further into Bethnal Green, crossing invisible boundaries marked only by subtle signs. The graffiti changes, symbols and tags that mean nothing to you but clearly communicate territory to those who know. The colors people wear shift slightly. More green here where you just saw more blue. The faces watching from corners alter in ethnicity and age. Irish giving way to English, young gang members appearing with different scars in different patterns. This is the border between the Nickel and the Titanics, Billy says, his voice dropping even lower. Named after the Titanic pub where they meet. Mostly English, old East End families who've been here for generations, who remember when this was their neighborhood before waves of immigration changed everything. They resent the newcomers, the Jews and Irish. Blame them for taking jobs and driving down wages. Fight them for territory constantly, though most of those fights are more about pride than actual profit. As if to illustrate Billy's point, a group of young men emerges from a side street, walking with the swagger of those who own the ground they're on. They wear no neckerchiefs but have distinctive scars, thin, deliberate lines across their left cheeks. Their mark, Billy whispers. Self-inflicted cut during initiation, heals into a permanent brand that identifies them to friends and enemies alike. The Titanics spot you and Billy. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with ginger hair and a face that looks like it stopped too many fists, steps forward while his companions spread out in a loose semicircle. It's a practice movement, you realize, designed to cut off escape routes, to position themselves for maximum advantage if violence becomes necessary. Billy Walsh, the ginger-haired man says. Not a greeting, just an identification. His voice is rough, damaged from too many fights, or too much gin, or both. What brings you to our street? And who's your friend with the soft hands? Just passing through, Tommy, Billy replies, his voice carefully neutral, showing a new worker around, helping him find his way to the docks. Tommy's eyes shift to you, assessing with disturbing accuracy. You're no dock worker, he says flatly. Too soft everywhere. Not just the hands. Backs too straight, neck too clean, boots too new despite the dirt. You're either police or a journalist, and I don't think you're police because they're too stupid to manage this good a disguise. Your heart hammers against your ribs, adrenaline flooding your system with the fight or flight response that evolution designed for exactly this moment. Billy remains outwardly calm, but you can see the tension in his shoulders, the way he shifted his weight forward onto the balls of his feet, ready to run or fight. "He's looking for work," Billy says, his tone still even. "Thought he might find something at the brewery. No threat to anyone." Tommy steps closer, close enough that you can smell the gin on his breath. See the network of broken blood vessels across his nose and cheeks. Read the casual cruelty in his eyes. This is a man who's hurt people for reasons far less significant than being a journalist in disguise. "We don't like strangers on our streets," he says slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "Especially not ones who look like they might be writing things down, taking notes, planning to tell tales. You writing things down?" "No, sir," you manage to say, your voice steadier than you feel. "Just looking for work." Tommy holds your gaze for a long moment, and you're acutely aware that your life might be decided in the next few seconds based on nothing more than this man's mood and whim. Then he laughs, a harsh sound without real humor. "Get him out of here, Billy. Before my boys decide to show him what happens to journalists who come sniffing around our business. And Billy, don't bring any more tourists to Titanic territory. Next time, I might not be feeling so charitable." He steps back, and Billy takes your arm, guiding you away at a measured pace that's somehow faster than it looks. "Don't run," Billy mutters from the corner of his mouth. "Don't show fear. Just walk like you've got every right to be here." You turn the corner, and Billy pulls you into another alley, checking behind to ensure you weren't followed. "That was close," he says, and you can hear the fear in his voice now that Tommy can't see it. "Too close." Tommy Horan doesn't forget faces. If he sees you again, especially if you write something that causes him trouble, you're done. He'll gut you himself and dump your body where it'll never be found. "How did he know?" you ask, your own voice shaking now that the immediate danger has passed. Billy shakes his head. Tommy's smart, survived in this business for 10 years, which is ancient in gang terms. Most leaders don't last 2 years before they're killed or arrested. Tommy's outlasted rivals, police crackdowns, gang wars, multiple attempts on his life. He's still here because he reads people better than anyone I've ever met. Probably spotted you for a fraud the moment he saw you. Just wasn't sure what kind of fraud until he looked closer. The danger of your investigation suddenly feels very real, very immediate. This isn't observing from a safe distance, taking notes in comfortable anonymity. You're walking among predators who kill for much less than being exposed in a newspaper. Men who've built empires on violence and intimidation, who've survived by being more brutal, more paranoid, more ruthless than their competitors. "Come on," Billy says, his breathing returning to normal, though his hands still shake slightly. "I know somewhere we can lay low for a bit. Let Tommy and his boys lose interest. Maybe forget your face if we're lucky. Though between us, I doubt we're that lucky." He leads you through a maze of back alleys and hidden courtyards, routes that clearly aren't on any official map, passages known only to those who've survived by knowing every escape route, every bolt hole, every place to disappear. When disappearing becomes necessary. The East End is revealing itself as a three-dimensional puzzle, with layers and depths and secret passages invisible to casual observers. Finally, you arrive at a small shop tucked into a corner you'd never find on your own. The sign identifies it as a tailor, but the windows are too grimy to see inside clearly, just vague shapes moving in dim light. Billy knocks a specific pattern, 3 sharp raps followed by 2 soft ones, and after a pause, the door opens. Inside, the atmosphere shifts completely. The smell changes from sewage and rot to cloth and dye and leather. An elderly man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose sits at a work table, sewing with tiny, precise stitches that speak of decades of practice and genuine skill. He looks up when you enter, his eyes sharp behind the thick lenses, assessing you in a heartbeat before returning to his work without a word. Safe house, Billy explains quietly, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Solomon runs a legitimate business, quality tailoring for those who can afford it, but he also provides refuge for people who need to disappear for a bit, need to wait out danger, need a place that gangs respect as neutral ground. Costs you, but you're alive to pay the bill, which is better than the alternative. You sit on a wooden crate near the back of the shop, your legs suddenly weak now that safety, temporary though it may be, has been achieved. Solomon brings 2 cups of weak tea without being asked, still without speaking, his movements economical and practiced. He serves and disappears back to his work table, giving you privacy while remaining aware of everything happening in his small domain. Billy sips his tea, staring at nothing, the day's tension slowly draining from his body. Solomon's Orthodox Jewish, he tells you. The Bessarabians protect him because he's one of their own, but he's declared himself neutral ground, won't turn anyone away who needs help, even if they're from rival gangs. Saved more boys from bleeding out after knife fights than I can count. Hid men from police when the alternative was transportation or hanging. Given food to families when even the missions turned them away. Why does he do it? You ask, genuinely curious about this man who operates a pocket of humanity in hell. Billy shrugs, but his eyes are distant, thoughtful. Some people try to make things better where they can. Solomon's seen too many boys killed in gang wars, too many families destroyed. Figures if he can give them a place to cool off, maybe pause before the violence escalates, maybe some survive who otherwise wouldn't. It's not much, but it's something. More than most do. It's a glimpse of unexpected grace, of someone choosing compassion in a world that offers every excuse for callousness. Solomon stitches his clothing with the same careful attention that he apparently stitches together a fragile piece, one temporary refuge at a time, knowing he can't solve the larger problems, but refusing to let that stop him from addressing the immediate ones he can reach. You sit in silence for a while, drinking the weak tea that tastes better than it should because it's offered freely, watching Solomon work with the meditative focus of a craftsman who's found purpose in his trade. The shop is quiet, a pocket of calm in the chaos outside. Through the grimy window, you can see shapes moving past, shadows of the gang world continuing its business. But in here, temporarily, you're safe. Billy eventually stands, stretching muscles that have been held tense for hours. We should move on, he says. There's more you need to see before tonight, and we've got limited time. Tonight's when the real power shows itself. Tonight you meet Arthur Harding, and if he agrees to talk to you, you'll understand things you can't understand just watching from the edges. Who is Arthur Harding? You ask, though you've heard the name whispered in conversations, always with a particular tone that suggests respect mixed with fear. Billy's expression grows serious. If One-Eyed Charlie is a businessman who uses violence when necessary, Arthur Harding is violence that learned business. He's young, maybe 30, but he's already legendary in the East End. Smart enough to negotiate when he can, ruthless enough to fight when he must, charismatic enough that men follow him into situations they know might kill them. And if he agrees to talk to you, if he decides your story is worth telling, you'll see the gangs from the inside in a way no outsider ever has. The prospect is both thrilling and terrifying. This is why you came, to get beyond the surface violence to the structures and systems underneath. But hearing the weight in Billy's voice, understanding that you're about to meet someone truly dangerous, makes your mouth go dry and your pulse quicken. You thank Solomon, who nods once, a minimal acknowledgement, and returns to his sewing. Billy leads you back into the streets, which have grown busier as afternoon progresses. Market stalls line some streets now, selling everything from rotting vegetables to stolen goods displayed with no attempt at subterfuge. Women argue over prices with vendors who've heard every haggling technique and remain unmoved. Children run wild through the crowds, some playing, some working, all learning the rhythms and rules of East End commerce. Billy points out the various economic layers with the expertise of someone who's lived this all his life. See that woman selling fish? She pays the local gang for the right to her spot. Not much, maybe 6 pence a week, but that's 6% of her income going to protection. That man with the cart of tools, half of those are stolen, and he pays a cut to whoever brought them to him, and that person pays a cut to the gang that controls theft operations in this area. The gang gets a piece of everything. Every transaction, every trade, every commercial activity generates tribute flowing upward to men like Charlie and Arthur Harding. It's why they're so rich while everyone else starves. You pass a building that Billy identifies as a common lodging house, somehow even worse than the one you stayed in. Men and women sleep 8 to a room, sometimes more, paying 4 pence for a spot on the floor. No bed, just space to lie down. Disease spreads like wildfire in these places, Billy says, his voice carrying genuine worry. Tuberculosis, cholera, typhus, typhoid. Gang members won't even recruit from the worst lodging houses. Too risky bringing sick boys into their ranks, having them infect everyone else. There's a hierarchy even in hell. The class system exists even among the desperate. There are degrees of poverty, depths of desperation, and the gangs position themselves at the top of this inverted hierarchy. They exploit, yes, but they also provide the only structure, the only opportunity for advancement, the only possibility of escape from the absolute bottom. As evening begins to fall, Billy's demeanor shifts again. He becomes more alert, more careful about which streets to take, more conscious of the lengthening shadows and the changing crowds. The day crowd is heading home or to pubs, seeking what comfort gin can provide. The night crowd is emerging, and they're different. Harder faces, more purposeful movements, eyes that track potential targets with predatory focus. This way, Billy says, leading you toward Bethnal Green again, but through different streets this time. Arthur's expecting us at the Crown. That's his headquarters, his seat of power. And remember, don't speak unless he asks you a direct question. Don't lie to him because he can spot lies like a butcher spots bad meat. And whatever you do, don't judge him. Not out loud anyway. He's killed men for less than an insult. The walk to the Crown Pub feels longer than it probably is, your nerves amplifying every sound, every shadow. You're about to meet one of the most powerful and dangerous men in London's criminal underworld, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Impress him, and you get the story of a lifetime. Offend him, and you might not leave the East End alive. The Crown Pub is larger than the Blind Beggar, more prosperous looking, despite being in the same rough neighborhood. The building is better maintained, the sign freshly painted, the windows actually clean. Guards stand at the door, thick-shouldered men with the faces of experienced fighters, checking everyone who enters with practiced efficiency. When you and Billy approach, one guard looks at Billy, nods, then looks at you with suspicion. Billy with a journalist, Arthur said to expect him. Billy says simply. The guard's expression doesn't change, but he steps aside. allowing entry while clearly remaining suspicious. Inside, the pub is crowded but quieter than you'd expect given the number of people. Conversations happen in low voices. No shouting. No visible drunkenness, despite the late hour and abundant alcohol. There's an undercurrent of discipline that speaks to serious business being conducted, an atmosphere of organization that's almost military in its precision. The crowd parts as Billy leads you through, people moving aside without being asked, creating a path toward the far corner. And there, at a table that commands a view of the entire room, sits a man who can only be Arthur Harding. He's younger than you expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair slicked back, clean-shaven in an era when most East End men wear beards to hide malnutrition-hollowed cheeks. He's dressed well, suit that probably cost more than most workers make in 6 months, watch chain visible, rings on his fingers. But it's his eyes that catch your attention. Intelligent, calculating, missing nothing, assessing you even as you approach. Billy walks right up to the table, and Harding nods permission for you both to sit. He doesn't introduce himself, doesn't ask your name. He simply looks at you for a long moment, and you have the distinct impression that he's reading your entire life story in your face, your posture, your clothes. "You're the journalist," Harding says finally. "Not a question, a statement. Billy says you want to write about us, about how we really work. Not the penny, dreadful rubbish the papers usually print. Not the moral panic stories about criminal savages. You want truth." "Yes," you reply, keeping your voice steady despite the fear thrumming through your veins. Harding leans back in his chair, still watching you with that unsettling intensity. "Truth is dangerous," he says, "for you more than me. You write what I tell you. Some people won't like it. Police won't like it because it exposes their corruption. Politicians won't like it because it questions why they've abandoned entire neighborhoods. Businessmen won't like it because it reveals how they profit from our activities while publicly condemning us. You prepared for that? Prepared for the threats, the attempts to discredit you, the pressure to change your story? I am, you say, hoping it's true." "We'll see," Harding replies. He gestures to someone you don't see, and moments later, a barman brings 3 glasses of whiskey. Real whiskey this time, expensive stuff, not the rot gut most pubs serve. The gesture is significant, you realize. Harding is offering hospitality, which in gang culture carries weight and obligation. First thing you need to understand, Harding continues once the whiskey is distributed, is that we didn't create this world. We inherited it. The poverty, the overcrowding, the lack of legitimate work, that's not us. That's your industrialists who need cheap labor. Your landlords who pack people into buildings like cargo. Your government that talks about progress while letting children starve. We just figured out how to survive in the world they created. We organized where they left chaos. We provided structure where they provided nothing. You're careful with your response. By preying on your own people? Harding's expression doesn't change, but something in his eyes suggests you've touched a nerve. By protecting our own people, he corrects. See, that's the narrative you comfortable types tell yourselves, need to tell yourselves to feel superior, that we're parasites, leeches, predators living off the suffering of innocents. But who keeps the opium dealers from flooding our streets with poison that would destroy what's left of our people? Us. Who stops the child snatchers who come looking for workhouse orphans to exploit in mills and brothels? Us. Who makes sure the elderly widow gets her coal delivery even when she can't pay? Us. The police? They're not here to protect us. They're here to protect the wealthy from us, to keep us contained, to make sure our desperation doesn't spill over into respectable neighborhoods. It's a perspective you hadn't fully considered, and Harding seems to sense your uncertainty. Look around this room, he says, gesturing broadly. Half these men are here because legitimate work doesn't exist, not for them. Factories won't hire Irish or Jews, claim they're untrustworthy, dirty, criminal, self-fulfilling prophecy if ever there was one. Docks are controlled by foremen who charge bribes for day labor, and even if you get hired, you might work all day and then be told there's no money to pay you. Shops want experienced workers, but how do you get experience when no one will hire you to start? So we created our own economy, our own rules, our own justice. Is it perfect? No. Is it violent? Yes. But it's better than the alternative, which is nothing, which is slow death by starvation, or disease, or despair. You notice the people in the pub are listening now, though most are pretending not to. This is clearly a speech Harding has given before, a justification he feels compelled to make, a defense of a life and a system that the outside world condemns wholesale. Tomorrow, Harding says, his voice returning to normal conversational volume, you'll see more. You'll see how we settle disputes without police involvement, how we protect our territories not just from other gangs, but from outside threats, how we provide for families when the father is killed or imprisoned. We're not saints, understand that, but we're not the devils you probably think we are either. We're men making the best of bad situations, using the only tools available to us. He stands, signaling the conversation is over for now. Billy will take you somewhere safe for the night. Tomorrow morning, 7 sharp, be back here. You'll see things that will change how you write about us, change how you understand what we do and why we do it. Or you'll get killed trying to understand, which would be unfortunate, but would at least give you a different kind of story. Either way, you'll have something to write about. With that, Arthur Harding walks away toward a back room, his men falling in behind him like an honor guard. The pub slowly returns to normal noise levels, but you can feel the eyes still on you, people assessing, judging, wondering what you'll write and how it might affect them. Billy drains his whiskey in one swallow. Come on, he says. I know a place you can sleep that's safer than most. Tomorrow's going to be a very long day, and you'll need your strength. Arthur's promised to show you things that outsiders never see, and that kind of access comes with risks, big risks. As you leave the Crown, night has fully settled over the East End. Gas lamps cast weak yellow light that barely penetrates the fog rolling in from the Thames, thick and damp and carrying the smell of the river in all its industrial pollution glory. Shapes move in the darkness, some legitimate, most not. The shadow economy of the East End continuing its eternal operations. The sounds of the night begin in earnest. Shouts from various pubs and gin palaces, breaking glass that might be accident or violence. A woman's scream that cuts short, leaving you wondering what happened and knowing you'll never find out. The whistle of police somewhere in the distance, too far away to matter, too slow to help whoever might need helping. Billy leads you through streets you couldn't retrace if your life depended on it, and it very well might. The navigation seems random, but clearly isn't. Billy choosing routes based on knowledge accumulated over years of surviving in these streets. He avoids certain corners, crosses some streets mid-block rather than at intersections, occasionally doubles back to check if you're being followed. Finally, you arrive at a boarding house that's marginally better maintained than the one you started in. The landlady, a sharp-eyed woman who misses nothing, accepts Billy's money with practiced efficiency and shows you to a small room on the 3rd floor. It's tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and small table. But it has a door that locks and a window you could escape through if necessary. Lock the door, Billy says, lingering in the doorway. Don't open it for anyone but me. I'll be back at dawn to take you to Arthur. and get some rest if you can. Tomorrow you're going to see things that'll stay with you forever. Things that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about crime and justice and how society actually works. Alone in the room, you sit on the bed, which is surprisingly comfortable compared to what you've experienced so far. Your body aches from walking all day through dangerous streets in a constant state of tension. Your mind races with everything you've witnessed: the casual violence of Dorset Street, the efficient brutality of Charlie's protection racket, the complex economics of gang operations, Tommy Horan's threatening intelligence, Solomon's unexpected sanctuary, and now Arthur Harding, articulate and dangerous in equal measure, offering access no journalist has had before. You pull out your notebook, hidden in a secret pocket sewn into your shirt, and begin recording. Observations by the light of a single candle that casts dancing shadows on the cracked plaster walls. The details pour out. A flood of names and places and conversations. The smell of blood mixing with sewage. The efficiency of protection collections. Tommy's ability to spot a fraud. Arthur's articulate justification of gang rule. The invisible boundaries between territories. The children learning crime as their only viable trade. When I look back at original notes journalists made during this period, what strikes me most is how they struggled to categorize what they were seeing. Were the gangs criminals or community organizers? Predators or protectors? Parasites or service providers? The answer, frustratingly, was all of these things simultaneously. They existed in a gray zone created by systematic failure, filling roles that government refused to fill, using methods that society condemned but secretly relied upon to keep the East End's desperation from spilling over into respectable neighborhoods. Your candle burns low as you write, wax pooling at the base, flame guttering in drafts that slip through cracks in the walls. Outside, the East End settles into its version of night, never truly quiet, always dangerous, but following patterns and rules invisible to outsiders. Somewhere a baby cries with the thin, weak sound of malnutrition. Somewhere a man and woman argue, their voices rising and falling in familiar rhythms of long-running conflict. Somewhere footsteps run past, too quick for anything legitimate, suggesting crime or flight from crime. This is the rhythm of the East End, has been for generations, will be for more, unless something fundamental changes in how society structures itself. Tomorrow you'll see more, understand more, perhaps get closer to the truth that drew you into this investigation. But tonight you write, documenting everything before memory fades or fear convinces you to soften the reality. You blow out the candle when it's burned too low to continue safely, and lie in the darkness, listening to the sounds through thin walls and window glass that rattles in its frame. Your comfortable bed at home seems impossibly distant, like something from another life entirely. Here, now, you're William Crawford, disguised journalist in the heart of London's most dangerous neighborhood, about to witness things that will change how you understand human nature and social organization forever. Sleep comes fitfully, when it comes at all, interrupted by dreams of one-eyed Charlie's calculating gaze, Tommy Horan's threatening presence, Arthur Harding's articulate condemnation of the society that created him and men like him. You're in deeper than you expected, seeing more than you bargained for, understanding less than you thought you would. The complexity resists simple narratives, refuses easy moral judgments, demands a kind of intellectual honesty that's uncomfortable and difficult. But the story is here, waiting to be told. Tomorrow brings more revelation, more danger, more understanding. Tonight brings only restless sleep in a narrow bed in a boarding house in Bethnal Green, surrounded by the sounds of a neighborhood that never truly rests, where survival is the only goal and every day is a battle against forces designed to destroy you. The final day of your investigation begins not with morning light, but with darkness and the sound of running feet in the street below. You wake disoriented, heart already racing from some nightmare you can't quite remember, reaching instinctively for your notebook before you're even fully conscious. Shouts echo through the narrow court, men's voices raised in anger or alarm. You can't immediately tell which. Billy's knock comes moments later, urgent and sharp, the pattern different from his usual arrival. "Get dressed," he calls through the door, his voice tight with tension. "Something's happened. Arthur wants you to see this. Needs you to see this." You pull on your clothes in the dark, fingers clumsy with sleep and adrenaline, and the accumulated exhaustion of 3 days in constant danger. When you open the door, Billy's face is grim in the light of his handheld lantern, shadows making his scar stand out stark and white against his skin. "A girl's been attacked," he says without preamble, already turning to lead you down the stairs. Not one of the brothel girls who chose that life, just a local girl walking home from her shift at the match factory. Man grabbed her off the street, dragged her into an alley. She screamed loud enough that people heard, loud enough that Arthur's men got there before the worst could happen. Did he? You can't finish the question, can't quite voice what you're asking. "No," Billy says, his jaw tight. "Arthur's men got there first, pulled him off her. They've got him now, holding him until Arthur decides what happens. You wanted to see how we protect the community when official law won't? This is it. This is what that protection looks like in real time. Not theory, not explanation, but actual action with actual consequences." The streets are still mostly dark, gas lamps casting their weak yellow glow through fog that's rolled in thick from the Thames, turning the East End into something from a Gothic nightmare. The air tastes of coal smoke and river rot, cold enough that your breath misses, cold enough that you understand why the factory girl was hurrying home, why she took shortcuts through alleys she probably knew were dangerous. Unlike the warm safety of your bed at home, where morning comes gently with birdsong and gradually increasing light, where danger is an abstract concept rather than immediate reality, here dawn is violent and sudden, marked by crisis rather than comfort. Here, every morning brings the possibility of violence, of death, of some new horror to navigate and survive. Billy leads you through alleys you've learned to navigate over the past 3 days, past corners where gang lookouts nod, recognition even at this ungodly hour, toward a growing crowd in a courtyard off Brick Lane. The same street that was nearly the site of gang warfare just yesterday, you realize. The same territory that Arthur Harding defended through negotiation and threat. Men and women pressed together in the courtyard, their faces lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on crumbling brick walls, making everyone look sinister, dangerous, though many are just ordinary residents drawn by the commotion. At the center of the crowd, Arthur Harding stands with 3 of his men, and between them kneels a man whose face is already bloodied from the rough handling he's received since being captured. The girl, maybe 16, stands with her mother and an older sister, all 3 wrapped in shawls against the cold and shock. The girl's dress is torn at the shoulder, her face streaked with tears, but she's alive and relatively unharmed beyond the terror of what nearly happened. That's what matters in the East End, you're learning. Could always be worse, usually is worse. When it's not quite as bad as it could be, that counts as luck. Arthur sees you arrive and nods slightly, acknowledging your presence but not breaking his focus on the situation at hand. Then he addresses the crowd, his voice carrying across the courtyard with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "This man," he says, pointing to the kneeling figure, "attacked Mary Connolly as she walked home from the match factory where she works 12-hour shifts, breathing phosphorus fumes for sixpence a day. Dragged her into an alley with clear intent to do her harm. She fought back, screamed, and our men responded within minutes. The question now is what happens to him? String him up, someone shouts from the crowd. Anonymous voice lost in the general murmur of agreement. Break his legs. Make an example that'll keep others from trying the same. Arthur raises a hand for silence, and the crowd complies immediately. We have rules, he says, and his voice carries a weight that makes even you, an observer trying to maintain journalistic distance, feel the importance of this moment. We have process. This isn't mob justice, isn't chaos. We do things properly, with witnesses and testimony and judgment rendered by consensus. Mary, did he succeed in harming you beyond the bruising and fear? Beyond what we can all see? The girl shakes her head, her voice small and trembling when she speaks. Your men stopped him in time, Mr. Harding. They heard me screaming and came running. If they hadn't been nearby, if they hadn't responded so fast... Her voice breaks, the implication clear without needing to be stated. You don't need to finish that thought, Arthur says gently, his tone softening in a way you haven't heard before. The attempt is crime enough. The intent was clear. That's what matters for judgment. He turns his attention to the accused man, who looks up with a mixture of defiance and terror playing across his bloodied features. You're not from around here, are you? Arthur asks, though it's clearly not really a question. Don't recognize you. Not one of ours. Not Bessarabian. Not Titanic. Not any gang we know. So you thought you could come into our territory, attack one of our girls, someone we're supposed to be protecting, and just walk away. Thought because she's working class. Because she's from the East End. Because she's nobody to people like you. That there'd be no consequences? The man tries to speak, stammering something about misunderstanding, about not meaning anything by it, about just wanting to talk to her. One of Arthur's men cuffs him hard enough to snap his head to the side, cutting off the excuses. Arthur continues, speaking now to the crowd rather than to the accused. This is what protection means, he says, and you recognize this as another version of the speech he gave you yesterday, but performed now for the community. A public demonstration of gang function. Not just collecting money from shopkeepers and brothel madams. Not just running gambling dens and controlling territory. Protection means our streets are safer than streets where there's no gang control. It means our girls can walk home at night with some reasonable expectation of safety. It means outsiders learn very quickly that the East End looks after its own, that we defend our people because nobody else will. What I witnessed in those pre-dawn hours was community justice in its rawest, most immediate form. When I later researched court records from the Metropolitan Police Archives, I found something revealing and disturbing. Official prosecution rates for assault against working-class women in the 1880s were dismally low, often less than 10% of reported cases. Police rarely bothered investigating unless the victim was from a respectable family. Courts rarely convicted, even when cases went to trial. And even when they did convict, sentences were often light, sometimes just a few months in prison. The gangs, whatever their other crimes and failings, provided a rough certainty that the official system couldn't or wouldn't match. Arthur makes his decision with the confidence of someone whose authority is absolute within his domain. The man will be marked, he announces to the assembled crowd, scarred in a way that everyone in London's underworld will recognize immediately as the mark of a predator. Someone who attacks women. Someone who can't be trusted. Then he'll be dumped in Titanic territory with word of what he did and why we've marked him. Let Tommy Horan and his boys decide if they want to harbor someone like this. Let them deal with the problem we've identified. It's a death sentence delivered with bureaucratic efficiency and political calculation. The Titanics, Arthur's rivals despite yesterday's negotiated peace, will almost certainly kill the man rather than be seen as protecting someone who attacks women. It would damage their reputation, undermine their own claims to provide protection, make them look weak or complicit. Arthur knows this. Everyone in the courtyard knows this, but it maintains the fiction of process, of rules, of justice rather than simple vengeance. The crowd disperses slowly as Arthur's men drag the condemned man away toward whatever fate awaits him. Some people look satisfied. Justice served according to their understanding. Others look uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing the brutality even while accepting its necessity. The girl and her mother approach Arthur, thanking him with the fervor of those who understand they've been saved from something truly horrific, something that would have destroyed not just the girl's body, but her entire future in a society that blames victims more than perpetrators. Arthur accepts their gratitude with visible discomfort, shifting his weight, looking away, clearly unused to being seen as heroic rather than dangerous. He's not a hero, you understand. He's a criminal who happens to enforce rules that align with basic human decency in this particular instance. Tomorrow, he might order someone beaten for missing a protection payment. The day after, he might arrange for a rival gang member to disappear permanently. Heroism and villainy aren't fixed categories here. They shift based on context and perspective. When the courtyard has mostly cleared, people returning to their homes or heading to their brutal jobs, Arthur turns to you with an intensity that makes you take an instinctive step backward. "You see now?" he asks, and there's something almost desperate in the question, a need for validation or understanding that surprises you. This is what the newspapers don't write about. They tell you, we're criminals, parasites, predators preying on the weak. And we are those things. I won't pretend otherwise. But we're also this. We're the reason that girl will sleep in her own bed tonight instead of being found dead in an alley tomorrow. We're the reason her mother can walk to market without constant terror. We're the structure and protection that exists because official structure and protection failed completely. Billy speaks quietly beside you, his voice carrying a weight of personal experience. He's right, you know. I've seen what it was like before the gangs organized properly, back when I was a boy. Pure chaos. Worse chaos than what exists now. Women couldn't walk alone at any hour. Children disappeared regularly, snatched from mills or worse. Every predator operated freely because there was no force strong enough to stop them. At least, now there's some order, some rules, some protection. For those who can't protect themselves. It's brutal order, yes, but it's better than no order at all. The three of you walk through streets that are beginning to lighten with approaching dawn, though the fog keeps visibility limited to a few yards in any direction. Factory whistles start their morning chorus, calling workers to 12 or 14-hour shifts in conditions that slowly destroy their bodies and lungs. Early workers emerge from lodging houses, faces already showing resignation to another day of brutal labor for wages that won't quite cover basic needs. Arthur leads you to a small cafe, one of the few open at this hour, a place where the owner clearly knows him and brings coffee without being asked. Real coffee, too, not the chicory substitute most can afford, steam rising from chipped cups in the cold morning air. They sit, and Arthur gestures for you to join them at a corner table where conversation can happen without being overheard. "You've been with us 3 days now," Arthur says, wrapping his hands around his cup for warmth. "Seen the protection rackets and how they actually function. Witnessed territorial negotiations and the threat of violence that keeps boundaries stable. Watched gang court render justice for the worst offenders. Saw tonight how we respond to attacks on our people. What are you going to write about all this?" What truth do you think you've discovered? The truth, you reply carefully, aware that your answer matters more than you might like. As I understand it anyway, that you're both criminals and community organizers, predators and protectors simultaneously. That you exist because the system failed these people so completely that they had to create their own systems, their own rules, their own justice. Arthur studies you over his coffee cup, his one good eye sharp and assessing. Close, he says after a long pause, but not quite complete. You're still thinking of us as an aberration, something wrong that needs fixing, a social problem to be solved through reform and proper policing. But we're not the disease, we're the symptom. Fix poverty, give people legitimate work that pays enough to survive on, build schools that actually accept East End children, station police who actually protect rather than just collect bodies and take bribes, provide housing that isn't slowly killing people through disease and overcrowding, and we disappear in a generation. But nobody wants to do that work. Too expensive, too complicated, easier to just condemn us and feel righteous about it while changing nothing fundamental. A police constable enters the cafe, the same Constable Davies you saw yesterday, collecting his weekly payment from Arthur. He spots your group, hesitates for just a moment, calculating whether to approach or pretend he hasn't seen you, then walks over with the resigned air of someone fulfilling an obligation he'd rather avoid. "Morning, Mr. Harding," he says, his tone neutral, professional, the voice of official authority performing its duties. "Heard there was an incident last night. A girl attacked, man apprehended. All handled, Constable Davies," Arthur replies smoothly, his voice equally professional. "No need for official involvement or paperwork. The man responsible has been dealt with according to our understanding of justice, permanently dealt with. He won't be troubling anyone again, and he won't be found in your jurisdiction to create problems for your reports." Davies nods, visibly relieved to avoid the paperwork and investigation that official handling would require. Good, good. Keep it quiet, keep it handled. That's what works best for everyone. No bodies to explain, no courts to tie up, no questions from my superiors about why attacks keep happening in areas we're supposedly patrolling. Arthur slides coins across the table with practiced smoothness. The movement so natural and casual that anyone watching might think they're simply sharing the cost of breakfast. Davies palms the coins equally smoothly, tips his hat in acknowledgement, and leaves without another word. The entire transaction takes less than 30 seconds, conducted in public, in daylight, with you as witness. This is corruption so normalized it doesn't even try to hide anymore. That's the system, Arthur says, watching your reaction with interest. Police take our money. We take care of business they don't want to handle. Everyone's happy. Except maybe you reformer types who think if you just got rid of the gangs through proper enforcement, everything would be fine. But get rid of us, and what fills the void? Tell me that. What replaces the protection we provide, the order we maintain, the justice we dispense? Nothing. Absolute nothing. Just every predator for themselves and the weak suffering even more than they already do. Billy has been quiet through this exchange, nursing his coffee with the air of someone who's heard variations of this argument many times. But now he speaks, his voice carrying an emotion you haven't heard from him before. "Tell him why I left, Arthur. Tell him the real cost of this life you're defending." Arthur's expression softens slightly, something almost like regret flickering across his features. "Billy was my best lieutenant," he says, and there's genuine respect in his voice. Smart, loyal, good with numbers and logistics. Could have led his own crew eventually, maybe even challenged me for leadership if he'd wanted. But he fell in love with a girl, whose father was a clerk in the city. Respectable man with respectable job and respectable expectations for his daughter's future. Wouldn't let his daughter marry a gang member, obviously. So Billy had to choose between the gang and the possibility of a different life. And you chose the girl, you say to Billy, understanding now the source of his particular bitterness. Billy's laugh is short and harsh. I chose the possibility of something different, he corrects. The idea that I could escape this, become respectable, build a legitimate life, didn't work out, obviously. Girl's father still wouldn't accept me even after I left the gang, even after I found legitimate work, even after I proved I was trying to change. Said I'd always be a criminal, always be dangerous, always be East End trash, no matter what I did. Girl eventually married someone else, someone proper with proper prospects. By then I couldn't go back to the gang. Once you leave, you're marked as unreliable, potentially dangerous, someone who might inform to save himself. Arthur let me live because we were friends, because I left properly rather than running or informing, but I can never return to that life. What do you do now? You ask, though you've spent 3 days watching him work as guide and fixer. This, Billy gestures vaguely around the cafe, at the street outside, at his own threadbare clothes. Guide journalists who want to see how the other half lives, run errands for people who need someone who knows the East End but isn't affiliated with any particular gang. Do odd jobs that don't require references or respectability. Make just enough to eat, just enough for a room that's slightly better than a common lodging house. Live in the gaps between territories where nobody bothers much with me because I'm too small to matter, too unaffiliated to be a threat. It's not much of a life, but it's mine. Only life available to someone who's neither fully in the gang world nor fully out of it. The cost of leaving, you're beginning to understand, is as high as the cost of staying. Billy's story illustrates the trap these men live in with perfect clarity. Join the gang, and you're locked into a life of violence and early death, marked forever by scars and reputation. Leave the gang, and you're outcast, unable to find legitimate work because of your history, unable to return to the only community that would accept you. There's no escape, no redemption, no path out once you're in. The system is perfectly designed to trap people and keep them trapped. Arthur stands, signaling that this particular meeting is ending. You've got your story now, he says, his tone somewhere between statement and question. 3 days of seeing how we actually operate, how we actually protect people, how we actually maintain order in a place where official order doesn't exist. Write it however you need to write it. Just remember that we're people, not monsters. We make choices with the options we're given. Those options are just different, much more limited than what you've ever faced in your comfortable life. He leaves, his men materializing from various corners of the cafe to escort him, a small army protecting their general as he moves through territory that's his but never truly safe. Billy remains, finishing his coffee with slow deliberation, staring at nothing in particular. What will you actually write? He asks after Arthur and his men have gone. When you're back in your hotel room with your clean sheets and hot water, when you're far from here and safe from consequences, what story will you tell? I don't know yet, you admit, and it's the truth. Everything I've seen is more complicated than I expected, more nuanced, less susceptible to simple moral judgments. That's the East End for you, Billy says with a tired smile. Nothing's simple here. Every solution creates new problems. Every answer raises new questions. Every act of protection requires acts of violence. Every moment of order is built on threats of chaos. You try to pull one thread to fix something, and the whole tapestry unravels in ways you didn't predict. You spend the morning walking alone for the first time. Billy having given you freedom to explore now that you're known to the various gangs, your face recognized as someone under Arthur Harding's temporary protection. It's both liberating and terrifying. You can move through streets that would have been death traps on your first day, but you're also acutely aware that this protection is temporary, contingent, and could evaporate in an instant if you do something to offend or if circumstances change. You visit the match factory where Mary Connolly and hundreds of other girls work, watching them emerge after night shift, their faces pale with phosphorus poisoning that will eventually cause their jaws to literally rot away, a condition called phossy jaw that's both horrifying and entirely preventable if factory owners would use safer materials. Their fingers are stained yellow, the chemical dye permanent under their nails and in the whorls of their fingerprints. These girls are 14, 15, 16 years old, already dying slowly from their employment. This is the legitimate work that society offers them. This is the alternative to gang life or prostitution. 12 to 14-hour shifts in barely ventilated rooms breathing poison for sixpence a day, wages that barely cover a shared room in a lodging house and leave nothing for food or clothing or any comfort whatsoever. You understand suddenly why some girls choose prostitution, why some boys choose gang membership. The legitimate options are just different forms of death, possibly slower, but no less certain. You pass schools that won't accept East End children because their parents can't afford the fees. Even the charity schools that supposedly exist for the poor have more applicants than spaces and choose the most promising, which generally means the least desperate. Churches that preach at the poor about moral failing and personal responsibility while doing little to address the structural conditions that create poverty. Charity organizations that demand evidence of deserving poverty before offering help, as if there's such a thing as poverty that isn't desperate. The entire system, you're realizing with growing clarity, is designed to keep these people in their place, to extract their labor while denying them dignity or opportunity or any path to improvement. It's not accidental. It's not unfortunate, but unavoidable. It's deliberately structured this way because wealthy people benefit from cheap labor, from desperate workers, from a population too busy surviving to organize politically or demand change. By afternoon, you're back at your lodging house, sitting at the small table in your room, notebook open before you, pages filled with observations and quotes and details from 3 intense days. Now you need to shape them into something coherent, something that tells truth without oversimplifying, that acknowledges complexity without paralyzing judgment. When I look back at investigative journalism from the 1880s, examining archives at the British Library and various newspaper collections, I'm struck by how most of it fell into predictable categories. Either sensationalist crime, reporting that treated gangs as exotic savages to be gawked at, focusing on blood and violence and drama while ignoring systemic causes, or moralizing reform literature that condemned the poor for their poverty, suggesting that better character would solve everything while ignoring economic structures. Very few writers managed to capture the actual complexity of gang life, the way it was simultaneously destructive and constructive, parasitic and protective, a rational adaptation to irrational circumstances. You begin writing, not the sensational exposé your editor expects and probably wants, but something more honest and difficult. You describe the protection rackets, yes, but also what they actually protect and why that protection is necessary in the absence of functional official law enforcement. The territorial violence, yes, but also why territories matter in a place where the only security is what you can enforce yourself. The corruption of police, yes, but also why that corruption serves everyone's interests except the abstract concept of justice itself. The afternoon fades into evening as you write, by gradually diminishing natural light and then by candle flame, trying to capture not just what you saw, but what it means, what it reveals about society and structure, and the way human beings organize themselves when official organization fails them completely. A knock interrupts your writing. Billy enters without waiting for permission, carrying 2 bottles of beer and a folded newspaper. Thought you might want to see this, he says, spreading the paper on your table with something like grim satisfaction. The headline screams about a major police raid on gang operations in Shoreditch, with breathless prose about brave officers confronting dangerous criminals, about progress in the fight against organized crime, about the thin blue line holding back chaos. You recognize several of the locations mentioned. You know from your 3 days of observation that these raids were almost certainly negotiated in advance, that the gangs were warned, that only token arrests were made of expendable low-level members while leadership remained untouched, that money changed hands to arrange even this theater of enforcement. This is what you're competing with, Billy says, tapping the newspaper with one finger. The official narrative. Police as heroes, gangs as pure villains. Simple story that lets everyone feel good about the situation without demanding any actual change. Your complicated truth, assuming you actually write it, will make people uncomfortable. They'll accuse you of sympathizing with criminals, of excusing violence, of undermining law and order. Are you prepared for that? I have to be, you say, though you're not sure it's entirely true. People should be uncomfortable. They should know what's actually happening a mile from their comfortable homes, should understand the systems that create and maintain these conditions. Billy smiles faintly, and there's something sad in the expression. You really are an idealist, aren't you? Still thinking that truth matters, that changing minds changes anything substantial. I used to think that way too. Before the East End taught me different. What did the East End teach you? You ask, genuinely curious about this man who's become something like a friend over 3 intense days. That survival is all that matters, Billy says flatly. Truth, justice, righteousness, reform, all those pretty words, they're luxuries for people who aren't starving, people who aren't desperate, people who have the breathing room to think about philosophy instead of just getting through today so they can face tomorrow. For us, for people actually living in the East End, rather than studying it from outside, there's only survival. Making it through each day with whatever tools and methods are available. It's perhaps the most honest statement anyone has made to you in 3 days, cutting through all the justifications and rationalizations to the core reality. Billy, for all his cynicism, has identified something essential about East End life. When existence itself is a daily struggle against forces designed to destroy you, philosophy becomes irrelevant, morality becomes situational, and all that matters is surviving to fight another day. You drink your beers in companionable silence, watching through the grimy window as evening settles over the neighborhood in shades of gray and brown and black. Children play in the court below, their games no different than children anywhere except played in garbage and sewage instead of grass and gardens. Women prepare meager dinners from ingredients that are more filler than nutrition. Men return from work or from crime. The line between the two often blurred beyond any meaningful distinction. I should go, Billy says eventually, standing and stretching muscles stiff from sitting. You'll be leaving tomorrow, I expect? Back to your comfortable world? Yes, you admit, feeling guilty about the comfort awaiting you. I have what I came for, more than I came for, actually. Do you, though? Billy looks at you with unexpected intensity. You have facts, observations, quotes, all the raw material for your story. But do you understand? Really understand deep in your bones what it means to live here, to have no choices, to be trapped by circumstances you didn't create and can't escape? Do you understand what it does to someone to know they're disposable, to know society sees them as less than human, to know that every single day is a struggle not just for comfort, but for basic survival? The question haunts you after Billy leaves. You've seen 3 days of East End life, walked the streets, witnessed violence, met the key players. But Billy's right to question whether that constitutes real understanding. You're a tourist in hell, someone who can leave whenever he wants, return to hot baths and clean sheets, and the security of knowing tomorrow isn't a life-threatening uncertainty. Your understanding is necessarily limited by your temporary status, your ability to escape, your fundamental safety. You write through the night, stopping only when your hand cramps badly enough that you can't continue, when the candle needs replacing, when the words blur together from exhaustion. The story pours out in fragments and impressions, trying to capture the reality you've witnessed without simplifying it into easy moral lessons or comfortable narratives. You write about Arthur Harding and his complex motivations, simultaneously brutal enforcer and community protector. About Billy Walsh and the impossible cost of trying to leave gang life, trapped forever in limbo between two worlds. About the protection rackets that actually protect because official protection doesn't exist. About the violence that creates order because official order has failed. About the corruption that makes the system function because the official system is already broken beyond repair. And you write about how society created this world through deliberate policy choices, through systematic neglect, through structures designed to extract labor while denying humanity. How the gangs are symptoms rather than causes, adaptations rather than aberrations, rational responses to irrational circumstances. As dawn breaks on your last day in the East End, you read through what you've written by the gray light filtering through your window. It's not what your editor wanted. It's not sensational enough for popular taste, not simple enough for comfortable consumption. But it's true as you can make it, given your limitations and perspective. You pack your few belongings, change into your actual clothes for the first time in days, preparing to shed the dock worker disguise and reclaim your identity as William Crawford, gentleman journalist, Oxford-educated man with prospects and comfort awaiting him. The transformation feels strange now, like putting on a costume rather than returning to your true self. The dock worker disguise had become more real over 3 days than your actual life feels at this moment. Billy appears at your door one final time, come to escort you to the boundary between the East End and the rest of London, to see you safely to where you can catch an omnibus back to your hotel and your real life. Ready? He asks. As I'll ever be, you reply, taking one last look around the small room that's been your home for 3 nights. He walks you to Whitechapel Road, the main thoroughfare that marks the boundary between worlds, where the East End gradually gives way to slightly less desperate neighborhoods. Here, people move differently, dress marginally better, speak with accents that mark them as belonging to the lower edges of respectable society rather than the depths of poverty. The contrast is jarring after 3 days in the heart of darkness. What happened to the gangs? You ask Billy as you wait for the omnibus. Years from now, I mean. Does this world continue forever? Does anything ever change? Billy shrugs, his expression unreadable. Who knows? Maybe we kill each other off eventually, territory wars escalating until there's nobody left. Maybe the police finally organize enough to actually crush us, rather than just pretending to while taking our money. Maybe the East End gets torn down and rebuilt, slum clearances scattering us like rats from a burning building. Maybe nothing changes, and 100 years from now, there's still gangs running these streets, still boys learning crime instead of reading, still the same endless cycle, grinding people into dust. When I researched what actually happened to these Victorian gangs, digging through records at various archives and interviewing historians who specialize in this period, I found that Billy's uncertainty was entirely justified. The gangs did eventually decline, but not because of police action or moral reform campaigns or anything the reformers of the 1880s proposed. They faded because the East End itself changed fundamentally. Slum clearances in the early 1900s destroyed entire neighborhoods, physically eliminating gang territories. Immigration patterns shifted as quotas were established and opportunities opened elsewhere. Labor laws slowly improved working conditions and reduced child poverty, though progress was measured in decades rather than years. The economic conditions that created the gangs gradually altered, and with them, the gangs themselves evolved or disappeared. But it took decades and left countless victims in its wake, generations sacrificed to slow progress and reluctant reform. Your omnibus arrives, horses steaming in the cold morning air, driver already calling out the route. You and Billy shake hands, an oddly formal gesture after 3 days of shared danger and revelation, after conversations that exposed more truth than either of you probably intended. Thanks, you say, meaning it, for keeping me alive, for showing me the truth, or as much of it as I could understand, for not letting me just see the surface violence and sensationalism. Just write it honestly, Billy replies, and there's something almost pleading in his voice. That's all I ask. We're not heroes. None of us are heroes, but we're not the villains you probably expected to find either. We're just people trying to survive in a system designed to destroy us. Write that. Make people understand that. The omnibus pulls us away, carrying you west towards your hotel, your real life, your comfortable existence. Through the window, you watch the East End recede, its narrow streets and crumbling buildings and desperate people fading into the morning mist. But the images stay with you, burned into your memory with the permanence of trauma or revelation. One-eyed Charlie collecting protection money with the efficiency of a banker managing accounts. The young boys learning crime as the only trade available to them. Mary Connolly being saved by gang justice when official justice had already failed her preventatively and would have failed her again afterward. Arthur Harding, articulating a philosophy of survival that's both horrifying in its brutality and difficult to argue against given the circumstances. Billy Walsh trapped forever between worlds, belonging to neither, surviving in the gaps. At your hotel, you bathe properly for the first time in days, the hot water a luxury almost painful after cold water splashed from cracked basins. The water turns black as you scrub away the accumulated grime of the East End, dirt and coal smoke, and the particular smell of poverty that seems to penetrate everything. You scrub until your skin is pink and raw, as if you could wash away not just the physical dirt, but the memories, the moral complexity, the uncomfortable truths that resist easy categorization. But those remain, etched into your consciousness as permanently as gang scars on members' hands, as visible as marks on the faces of those judged by gang courts. You've seen something that can't be unseen, understood something that can't be unlearned. The East End has changed you in ways you're still beginning to process. You sit at your proper writing desk in your comfortable hotel room, arrange your extensive notes in chronological order, and begin the final draft of your article series. You write about Arthur Harding and his complex motivations, trying to capture how someone can be simultaneously criminal and community organizer, predator, and protector. About Billy Walsh and the impossible price of trying to leave, the way the system traps people and keeps them trapped. About the protection rackets that actually protect because official protection doesn't exist or doesn't function. About the violence that creates order because official order has failed utterly, about the corruption that makes everything work, because the legitimate system is already corrupt in different, more socially acceptable ways. And you write about how society created this world through choices that were deliberate rather than accidental, through policies designed to benefit some while crushing others, through systematic neglect that was strategic rather than unfortunate. The gangs didn't appear spontaneously. They were created by conditions that powerful people had every reason to maintain, that served interests much larger than the East End itself. Your editor will probably soften some of the critique, make it more palatable for readers who want to feel concerned without feeling implicated, who want to believe in simple solutions that don't require fundamental change. But you'll have told the truth as you witnessed it, complicated and uncomfortable as that truth may be. As you write the final paragraphs, trying to bring everything together into some coherent conclusion, you think about your comfortable bed waiting for you tonight. Clean sheets that are changed regularly by staff you never see. Soft pillows that cradle your head rather than lumps that create new aches. The security of knowing you're safe. That tomorrow holds no immediate threats. That your survival isn't dependent on navigating gang territories or avoiding violent criminals or finding enough money for food and shelter. These simple things that everyone deserves, but only some receive. The East End children sleeping 3 or 4 to a bed in rooms without heat don't have this comfort. The gang members who might die tomorrow in territorial disputes won't know this peace. The factory girls slowly dying from phosphorus poisoning will never experience this security. The system that creates such desperate inequality continues, indifferent to individual suffering, serving interests that benefit from maintaining exactly this imbalance. Perhaps like William Crawford, you've faced challenges over these 3 days that tested your assumptions about human nature, about society, about justice and morality, and how the world actually works. But unlike those East End residents, unlike the people you've observed and interviewed and documented, you have choices, opportunities, the luxury of reflection without immediate threat. You can think about philosophy because you're not desperately focused on survival. You can consider moral complexity because you're not trapped in situations that demand simple, brutal responses. Let that awareness sit with you now as you prepare for sleep. Let yourself truly feel the enormous unearned privilege of your position. Not to feel guilty, which serves no one, but to understand with clarity the structural forces that create vastly different life experiences for people living just miles apart in the same city. Your body sinks into the hotel mattress, proper support after days on thin straw and broken boards. The difference is almost obscene in its comfort. Allow your muscles to relax completely, releasing the accumulated tension of 3 days in constant danger, 3 days of witnessing violence and desperation, and the 1,000 small cruelties of poverty. Your breathing slows naturally as you consciously let go of the narrow streets and crowded courts of gang-ruled London, as you return fully to your safe haven. The gangs can't reach you here. The violence is distant now, transformed from immediate threat to material for your article, from lived experience to documented observation. The gangs of London's East End existed in the shadows of Victorian prosperity, a dark mirror reflecting what society preferred not to see, what comfortable people could ignore as long as it remained contained in specific neighborhoods. They were symptoms of systemic failure rather than causes, adaptations to impossible circumstances, human organizations emerging to fill voids that official institutions refused to fill. They were neither heroes nor simple villains, just humans making their way through a world that offered them nothing except the chance to take what they needed through violence and organization. They created order where chaos would otherwise reign, justice where law didn't reach or didn't function, community where society said none should exist or deserve to exist. And sometimes, in understanding such complexity, in holding multiple truths simultaneously without collapsing them into comfortable simplicity, we come closer to real wisdom than we ever do with simple moral certainties that make us feel righteous without demanding change. Think about Arthur Harding's words as sleep begins to approach. We didn't create this world. We inherited it. They organized in the spaces society left empty. They provided services society refused to provide. They were brutal. Yes. Criminal. Absolutely. But they were also responding rationally to irrational circumstances, building structures that met genuine needs even if the methods were horrifying. And think about Billy Walsh's observation that survival is all that matters when you're desperate, that philosophy is a luxury for those with full bellies and secure shelter, that truth and justice are abstract concepts when you're focused on making it through today to face tomorrow. Let your eyes close naturally now. Let the images from the East End fade into the background of memory rather than the foreground of immediate experience. The children on corners can rest now. The gang members can lower their guard. The desperate mothers can stop worrying, at least in your imagination, at least for this moment. Your breathing deepens as you recognize that sleep is coming, that your body is finally safe enough to truly rest. The comfortable darkness of your hotel room is nothing like the suffocating darkness of East End lodging houses. This is chosen darkness, controlled darkness, darkness that holds no threats. And as you drift towards sleep, perhaps you carry with you a clear understanding of how the world actually works beneath its comfortable surface narratives, how systems that seem natural are actually constructed, how poverty that seems inevitable is actually created through policy choices, how people who seem criminal are actually adapting rationally to circumstances that offer no legitimate alternatives. The gangs existed because society needed them to exist, even while condemning them. They provided services that official institutions couldn't or wouldn't provide. They maintained order in places where official order had failed. They created community where official community had abandoned people. Let that understanding settle into your consciousness as sleep takes you deeper, not to excuse violence, which remains violence regardless of context, not to romanticize poverty, which remains grinding and desperate regardless of how people adapt, but to see clearly the systems that create these conditions, the choices that maintain them, the interests that benefit from them. Your muscles relax completely now, letting go of the last remnants of tension. Your mind quiets, thoughts slowing and scattering like leaves in gentle wind. The story is told, documented, ready to be written in its final form. Your work is done. Sleep comes fully now, deep and restful, the sleep of someone who's witnessed something important and lived to tell about it. The East End continues its cycles without you, its desperate rhythms unchanged by your 3 days of observation. But perhaps your telling of its story will reach someone who can make a difference, someone with power to change the systems that create such desperate circumstances. Or perhaps not. Perhaps nothing changes. Perhaps the story is read and forgotten, displaced by newer scandals and fresher outrages. Perhaps the gangs continue, generation after generation, adapting to new circumstances but fundamentally unchanged because the conditions that create them remain fundamentally unchanged. But you told the truth as you saw it. That has to be enough. Let it be enough as sleep takes you completely now, as consciousness fades into peaceful darkness, as the story ends and rest begins. The dangerous streets of 1880s London can't reach you here in your safe haven, in your comfortable bed, in your protected space. Only peaceful dreams await in this comfortable darkness. Only rest and recovery from the intensity of 3 days, bearing witness to how the other half lives, how desperation creates its own systems, how humans organize when society abandons them. Sleep deeply now, sleep safely. Tomorrow brings return to normal life, but tonight brings rest after witnessing truths that most people never see, understanding complexities that most people never face, documenting realities that most people prefer to ignore. The gangs of London's East End were real, are real in their historical moment, remain real in their legacy and lessons. They showed how humans adapt, how communities form, how justice manifests when official justice fails, how protection emerges when official protection disappears. Rest now in that knowledge. Rest now in that understanding. Rest now in the comfort of safety, knowing that what you witnessed matters, that truth told honestly has value even when it changes nothing immediately, that bearing witness is itself an act of importance. Sleep comes completely now, fully and deeply, carrying you away from Victorian London to wherever dreams may go, peaceful and safe, and far from the desperate streets where gangs ruled and survival was the only law that truly mattered. Rest well. The story is told. The truth is documented. The East End continues without you, but you carry it with you now, changed by what you've seen, marked by what you've understood, responsible for telling what you've witnessed. Sleep now, just sleep. Everything else can wait for tomorrow.